Clara had been twirling and leaping for as long as she could recall. Dance wasn't just her passion. It was the very essence of her being. The stage transformed her, making her the most genuine version of herself. Today's performance, a roaring triumph. Clara vibed with the crowd, bridging the gap to share and soak up their energy. Of course, she wasn't strutting solo. They had a troupe, famed not just locally but beyond the city limits. Clara, the prima ballerina of the ensemble, seized nearly every lead role. Surprisingly, there was barely a hint of drama within the group. Individuality thrived here, a rarity in the artistic world indeed. For Clara, it was a unique blessing. She was young, joyous, and brimming with dreams for the future. Tonight, the troupe would toast the tour's grand finale with a lavish banquet. Clara had meticulously prepped for the occasion. She relished these gatherings, contrary to the stuffy reputation they often held. Draped in a stunning blue gown that flattered her lithe frame, she felt poised and elegant. Her hair, fashioned into an elaborate do, framed her face, accentuating her striking blue eyes. Simply put, she was a vision of beauty. The soirée was buzzing when he made his entrance, a tall, dapper figure with a smile that could light up the room. Instantly, the female contingent took notice, Clara included. This mysterious newcomer piqued her curiosity. Yet, he acted with the confidence of a host, mingling with guests and dancing as if he belonged. His ease was almost infectious, capturing the attention of everyone around him. "Eliana," Clara addressed her friend. "Do you have any idea who it is?" "I do, it's Alisher, the mayor's son. I wouldn't recommend getting to know him. He's a real jerk." "And how do you know that?" Clara inquired. "Do you remember why Josephine left us?" Eliana asked Clara. "Well, she got pregnant and decided to keep the baby." "That's correct, she got pregnant. And guess who the father is?" Eliana paused for effect. "Don't tell me it's him," Clara replied with disbelief. "Exactly. As soon as he found out Josephine was expecting, he disappeared without even saying goodbye. His father, however, offered Josephine a handsome sum of money as compensation. Josephine thought it over and accepted it. And she was absolutely right. A worthless sheep is just a speck of wool. Clara couldn't fathom the barrage of unkind words about this striking gentleman as she listened to Eliana. He possessed such a genuine smile and treated women with utmost courtesy. Perhaps Eliana herself harbored affections for Alisher, Clara pondered, but he remained oblivious to her presence. That must be why Eliana is seething with anger. Lost in her thoughts, Clara gazed at Alisher, unaware that he too had noticed her. Only when this dashing man started moving in her direction did she snap out of her trance. Catching sight of Alisher approaching, Clara felt a slight blush creep onto her cheeks, but she gathered her nerves and fearlessly met his gaze. Thus their introduction unfolded. Clara and Alisher spent a blissful month together. Clara fell head over heels for him, with no second thoughts. She disregarded her friend's admonitions, assuming their words stemmed from nothing but jealousy. Now 2 fires burned brightly in her life: dancing and Alisher. Today, after the rehearsal for their concert, she and Alisher made plans to have dinner together. He picked her up and then dropped her off at home so she could prepare herself. Clara meticulously groomed herself, adorning her best attire, showcasing her magnificence before her beloved. "I'm all set," Clara beamed. "Absolutely delightful," Alisher responded, approaching her and planting a loving kiss on her lips. "My darling," he whispered, "shall we make our way? I'm famished." "Let's go then, I'm hungry too," Clara replied. The night was splendid. A posh restaurant, exquisite dishes, and wine so tasteful it danced on their palates. Everything was top-notch. The only thing that gave Clara pause was Alisher's excessive wine consumption. "Alisher, have you considered taking a cab home?" she inquired. "Why do you say that?" "Are you tired of my car?" he retorted. "No, of course not. But you've had a lot to drink." "You can't drive," she explained. "Don't fret, my love," he reassured, flashing a smile. "I know my limits, and I wouldn't trade this phenomenal evening with my girlfriend for anything in the world." And he beamed at her anew, his grin coaxing Clara's heart to soften like melting ice cream. Returning his smile, she continued with her meal. Once they had left the restaurant, Clara and Alicia settled themselves into the car. Alicia, however, had indulged a tad too much and was noticeably intoxicated. "Alicia, perhaps we should hail a taxi. It's not safe for you to drive in this state. I think you've had too many," she suggested worriedly. "Yes, I'm indeed intoxicated, but it's your love, not the wine, that has me spinning," Alicia proclaimed before planting a fervent kiss on her lips. Clara wasn't particularly pleased. Alicia's current demeanor was unfamiliar to her, and it unsettled her. She wanted to express her concerns, but Alicia had already ignited the engine and pulled away. He handled the vehicle superbly, as he always did. Every time he took the wheel, Clara couldn't help but admire his skill, as though he and the car merged into one entity. Her worries began to dissolve as she watched him navigate. Just as she was relaxing, a blaze of harsh light struck her eyes. The blaring sound of brakes followed, then came a forceful collision. Consciousness flickered in fits and starts. Initially, there were murmurs. "Clara, can you hear me? Wake up, Clara, wake up." She felt a soft tap on her cheeks, and with considerable effort, opened her eyes. "Well, that's a relief, you're awake," remarked the doctor. Individuals clad in white coats busied themselves around Clara. She gradually turned her head and noted that she was in a hospital room. Various machines surrounded her, and she lay on the bed, unexpectedly wrapped in bandages. "Where am I?" she inquired of the nurse, who was attaching a monitor. By that moment, it was just the two of them in the room. The nurse faced Clara and with a strained smile responded, "You're in the hospital." The smile appeared forced, and Clara sensed that her condition wasn't great. "What happened?" Clara inquired once more. "You were in an accident," the nurse replied. At that moment, memories flooded back, a flash of blinding light and the crash. But it wasn't just her. Alicia had been with her. What had happened to him? "I wasn't on my own, and what about him?" "You're referring to the fellow you were with. He's fine. The collision impacted your side. You sustained injuries, while he walked away with hardly a scratch. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on your side. Your foot was smashed to bits. It couldn't be salvaged." "Excuse me, what is it again?" Clara was bewildered. Clearly, the nurse lacked her way with words, so she clarified. "Your foot was removed, you've been crippled." Clara's reaction was indescribable. Initially, she fell silent, then burst into uncontrollable laughter, followed by tears and shrieks. The nurse, alarmed, immediately summoned a doctor. A flurry of staff rushed in, restraining Clara amidst her turmoil. Subsequently, the doctor administered a sedative, and Clara drifted into sleep. Clara had spent approximately a month within the confines of the hospital. Her journey towards recovery had been arduous and taxing. The burden she carried was not solely due to the physical trauma, but also a deep moral sorrow. According to her friends, Alicia had revealed his true colors, emerging as a despicable individual. He had come to visit Clara on a single occasion, with the sole purpose of persuading her to testify that she, and not he, had been the one behind the wheel during the accident. As she gazed upon him, she couldn't fathom what had become of his once enchanting Alia. In his presence, she found herself face to face with a pitiful, frightened being, barely resembling a man. The revulsion she felt towards him was overwhelming, to the extent that she refused to utter a single word in his presence. Just as he was about to depart, he paused by the doorway and uttered these colorless words, "What have you achieved?" My Father will ensure that I am granted absolution. You could have profited from this situation, but now you lie here, on the verge of death. Who has any use for you now, a mere invalid?" And forcefully the door was slammed shut. In that moment, not only did the door behind her once beloved man close in front of Clara, but also the door to her life, dreams, and future came crashing down. The opportunity to dance, her passion, had been cruelly taken away from her. So what purpose was there in living if dance no longer had a place in her existence? However, her resilient body continued its recovery, step by step. The guys from her dance group made frequent visits, offering unwavering support. Yet, after their departures, she would weep inconsolably and blame herself for falling into the clutches of a deceitful scoundrel. Clara found solace on the hospital balcony, where she now spent much of her time. Her overall condition was improving, granting her the freedom to enjoy the warm summer days enveloped in lush greenery. Birds were singing, cars were blaring, and folks were bustling around. Life was in full swing for everyone except Clara, a young girl confined to her wheelchair on the hospital balcony. While she wallowed in self-pity, the door creaked open, and another wheelchair was maneuvered onto the balcony. Seated in it was an elderly woman, frail to the point of translucence, clearly battling a serious illness. The nurse parked the chair a short distance from Clara, adjusted the old lady's blanket, and slipped back indoors. The woman turned toward Clara and offered a smile. Clara couldn't help but notice her eyes, astonishingly youthful and vibrant. They were a stark contrast to her weathered skin and delicate frame. "Nice to meet you," the woman exclaimed out of the blue. "I'm Mrs. Jenkins, and you?" "I'm Clara," Clara replied. Mrs. Jenkins redirected her attention to Clara's injured leg. "What happened?" she inquired. Clara didn't feel inclined to divulge the details of her accident, but courtesy compelled her to respond. "It was an accident," she stated tersely. "And now you believe your life is over. Are you just going to mope around?" Mrs. Jenkins questioned. Clara looked at her in astonishment. A surge of anger suddenly engulfed her, prompting her to retort sharply. "What do you know about me that entitles you to make such assumptions? Where do you get off thinking I'd spill my guts to you?" Mrs. Jenkins never took her gaze off Clara as she spoke. "Anger has its merits. It's proof that life still flickers within you. However, you must redirect that fire elsewhere." Clara was silent, pressing the nurse's call button. When the nurse arrived, she asked to be escorted back to the room. Throughout the day, Mrs. Jenkins's words echoed in her head. The phrase, "So you're not dead yet," constantly reminded her of herself. With each echo, her awareness grew deeper. She was very much alive, and she needed to do something about it. As dusk settled, Clara decided to take action. She wheeled herself out of the room, navigating the hospital corridors without anyone's assistance, determined to find Mrs. Jenkins. Her search concluded in the 3rd ward, where she finally located her. "Mrs. Jenkins, may I come in?" There was a hesitancy in Clara's voice. "Absolutely, come on in, Clara," replied Mrs. Jenkins. She was sitting alone in her room and gingerly eased herself out of bed. "Would you like some tea?" she offered warmly. "I've got a bit of everything here. Some candy, buns, cookies. Take your pick. The kids are always thinking of me, bringing treats every day." That evening, Clara and Mrs. Jenkins had an extended heart-to-heart, and it was during this conversation that Clara felt the start of her recovery. As it turned out, Mrs. Jenkins had been a teacher choreographer. In her heyday, she was quite a celebrated ballerina. Once her dancing days were over, she took up teaching at a university. Eventually, illness prompted her to switch gears to a dance school. Mrs. Jenkins had devoted over a decade to working with children. However, as her condition worsened, she could no longer continue. Yet the children's admiration for her knew no bounds. They kept visiting her even after she was confined at home, eagerly sharing their achievements and milestones. Mrs. Jenkins had a kind word for everyone she encountered. During her stay at the hospital, where she was admitted after a severe attack, children would often come to visit her. There were times when Mrs. Jenkins was too unwell to receive them in her ward. But whenever she felt better, their visits brought her immense joy. Clara observed these meetings with great surprise. She realized that in order to earn such love, one had to not only be skilled in their profession, but also genuinely love children. One evening, Mrs. Jenkins shared with Clara the inspiring tale of Sadha Chandran, an Indian dancer who gained fame for returning to her passion after losing her leg. Clara couldn't believe it at first, but soon recognized the incredible resilience and determination in Sadha's story. "Can you actually perform a dance with a prosthetic limb, Mrs. Jenkins?" Clara exclaimed in disbelief. "There are no limits to what we can achieve," Mrs. Jenkins responded confidently. "It all hinges on our passion and the extent to which we're prepared to go for the love of our craft." When Clara arrived home from the hospital, she found everything in pristine condition. Her colleagues had pulled out all the stops, every corner sparkled, and fresh blooms adorned the rooms, creating a celebratory atmosphere complete with delightful snacks. It was a truly warm welcome back. Once her friends departed, solitude took over. Clara's thoughts frequently drifted to Mrs. Jenkins's story about the Indian dancer. Curious, she grabbed her laptop and entered Sadha Chandran into the search bar, eager to uncover her story. What she learned was riveting. The incident traced back to 1981. Yet Sadha remained a vibrant figure in the dance world. Inspired by Sadha's resilience, Clara resolved that she too could make a triumphant return to performing. That evening, as she drifted off to sleep, her mind was alight with determination. She was capable of achieving anything. Clara unwrapped the long-awaited package, which turned out to be a book. It was a dance guide that Sadha created after her accident. Clara went all over the place in search of this manual and eventually got a copy from abroad. It has become a rare find in local conditions. Simultaneously, Clara embarked on a quest to acquire a plastic prosthesis, which proved to be an enormous challenge. The price tags on these prostheses shattered all of Clara's grim expectations. However, her squad stepped up big time. They orchestrated a fundraising tour across multiple cities, amassing a substantial sum to support her. 4 months after her hospitalization, Clara was fitted with a new prosthesis. Her rehabilitation took place in the capital, where she mastered the art of navigating life with her new support. In order to get to the prosthetics and rehabilitation center, Clara made a bold decision to part with her luxurious home and invest in a modest 2-room apartment. But that didn't stop her. Driven by unwavering determination, Clara set a clear goal for herself and knew that nothing could hinder her success. Mrs. Jenkins, the man Clara loved most in the world, sadly passed away today. Throughout this time, Clara did not forget about Mrs. Jenkins for a second, often visiting her apartment to discuss her future endeavors. Jenkins always provided her with constant support and encouragement, instilling in Clara a firm faith in her own abilities. Alas, during Clara's stay in the capital, Mrs. Jenkins became seriously ill and died just 3 days after Clara's return. It is noteworthy that Clara arrived at the funeral without the help of crutches. Only a slight limp gave away the fact that Clara was wearing a prosthetic. At her grave, Clara solemnly promised Mrs. Jenkins that she would undoubtedly regain her place on the stage. This marked the beginning of the most difficult period in Clara's life. In fact, she had to re-familiarize herself with the intricacies of dance technique. Although Clara may have seemed fragile, her steely determination propelled her forward against all expectations. She devoted herself to 10 grueling hours of practice each day. Upon returning home, she would remove her prosthesis, and often break down in tears from the excruciating pain. Frequently, her leg was raw and bleeding. Following a meticulous cleaning routine and applying healing salves, she would finally rest, pain gradually easing, only to return to the dance studio the next morning. Over the months, a callus formed where her leg met the prosthetic. Much like a guitarist develops toughened skin on the fingertips. Slowly, the agony subsided. Clara was no longer in pain. She had restored the former suppleness and agility of her body. She was poised to rejoin her team. That day marked a monumental milestone for Clara. 2 years post-accident, she triumphantly re-entered the dance group. As a full-fledged member, she emerged as more than just a beacon of inspiration. Clara became the emblematic face of her troupe. Her solo performance featured prominently in the lineup. Word of Clara's remarkable journey spread beyond the confines of their town, drawing packed venues wherever they performed. Throughout the period Clara was healing from the devastating event, she had remained out of touch about Alisher. Her only piece of knowledge was that he had escaped any legal consequences for the incident, claiming his father had effectively bought his freedom. As Clara was sipping her tea in the kitchen, the evening news flickered on. Within moments, a breaking story caught her attention. The mayor's son had been rushed to the hospital suffering from a gunshot wound. The injury occurred during a confrontation with a man whose wife had been the company of the mayor's son that night. The bullet had struck his backbone. Rumors swirled that Alisher might now be confined to a wheelchair for life. The pain that Clara had once endured from the man she had loved bubbled up inside her again. Compelled, she changed her clothes and headed to the hospital. There, Alisher was reclining in isolation, surrounded by a myriad of medical devices. The room was filled with bouquets of flowers, signaling its reservation for someone of high status. Upon laying eyes on Clara, Alisher's initial shock gave way to a weak smirk that seemed both sad and forced. "Clara, great to see you." "Hey, Alisher. How's it going?" "Well, not exactly the best time for me, as you can tell. I haven't been able to get you off my mind. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Clara felt a wave of revulsion wash over her. There wasn't a trace of genuineness in his words. She recognized that this man would be a cynic forevermore. "Oh, really?" she inquired. "When did this revelation hit you? Was it when your old man bailed you out of the slammer?" Alisher's smile vanished, replaced with a flash of rage in an instant. "Why did you come here? Just to see me down? To revel in my misery?" "No, I've returned to offer you the words you spoke to me on a prior occasion. Now lie here and expire, as you are of no use to anyone, you feeble individual." Clara uttered these words, rose from her seat, and exited the room. Alisher, fueled by impotent rage, snatched a cup from the table beside the bed and hurled it forcefully against the door. Meanwhile, Clara proceeded homeward, feeling a sense of liberation from her ties to the past. From this moment forward, Clara realized that there are no true impossibilities in this world. The key is to maintain faith and perseverance. Mrs. Jenkins, whose photograph now occupied the most esteemed position in the dance studio and Clara's residence, played a significant role in this newfound understanding.